This is the laptop bag that I'm going to show you how to make. I'm sure many of us have laptops nowadays, and to help to protect it, this is all nice and padded and squashed inside as well. So regular laptop size. I'll show you how to measure that in just a second, but I just wanted to show you a couple of variations as well. So I'm using quite neutral colours, natural colours. This was one that was a little bit snazzy that I made for my daughter, and I embroidered this with an embroidery machine before I put the fabric together. So that was embroidered first, and I've just put a tassel on the bottom and it's fastened over with a magnetic clasp. I'll show you how to do that later as well. And if it's not a laptop you have but a netbook or a tablet, how about making a smaller version? With this version it doesn't have the wadding on the inside or the batting, it's just a felt lining. So again, you've got your screen there which is nicely protected because it's nice and soft and felt, and apart from protecting your laptop or your netbook, they look very stylish as well. So let's start by measuring our laptop and see how we're going to make this bag. I've cut one piece of fabric for the front of my bag, about 1.5 inches larger than my laptop, because I wanted to sit quite snugly inside it. That's going to be the front of my bag. I'll also need one piece of batting cut to the same size. It doesn't matter that mine's a little bit bigger, and it does tend to grow while you're sewing with it, so I'll trim that down afterwards. And then I have one piece of lining fabric, again cut to the same size. So that's the front of the bag. The back of the bag and the section that folds over, again I have my outer fabric, my batting and my lining. Now the only difference here, they're all cut to the same size, but they're twice the size of the piece I've just cut. So that's the front of my bag, the same width but twice the length, because this is the bit that's going to fold over. That'll make sense in just a second. But basically the size of the laptop, 1, 2, 3 pieces, lining, outer, wadding, twice the size because this is the bit that's going to fold over, and again lining, wadding and outer. I'm going to put that to one side for just a second, because the first pieces I'm going to sew together are the wadding and the lining for the front of the bag. Now all I've done here is to put a little bit of repositionable spray adhesive in between my wadding and my outer fabric. Not the lining, just the wadding and the outer fabric. It's not really that important if you don't have it, but it does help to keep your fabric smooth when you put the wadding behind it. Now I'm going to put my outer face together with my lining, and I'm just going to sew across the top section. So I'll pop a few pins in there to hold it in place, and I'm just going to use a straight stitch and sew all the way across. So now I'm sewing around about 1/4 inch seam allowance, so 1/4 inch from the edge, and I'm just going to reverse backwards to secure the stitches and then straight stitch all the way across, keeping that seam allowance the same. I use the edge of my foot on the machine as a guide, which on this one is 1/4 inch, so as long as I line my fabric up with the edge of my foot, I know I've got a straight line. So that's going to be the front of my laptop bag. Oops. That's the piece that I'll see. I'll need to press that, and then that's the lining. And I'll trim back the wadding in a second, just to make that nice and square. But what I'm going to cope with next is the back of the bag and the flap. So like with the front, what I'm going to do is to put some spray on the wadding, and that's going to attach to the front, to the outer layer. And just smooth that down so there's no wrinkles in it. And I'm going to lay this for the moment just on top of my lining, and I'll show you the way that it's going to come together. So the part that I've just sewn will be the front of my bag. There's my lining on the inside of the bag. There's wadding in between the two sections, and this is the part that comes over the front of the bag like an envelope. What I do want to do though, because I don't want that square across the front, I want it to be shaped like an envelope. So I'm going to measure and mark like a triangular shape on the front. As long as all three pieces of fabric together, it doesn't matter which order they're in at the moment. And just make sure that if you have a pattern on your fabric, that you're cutting the side that faces down when it hangs over. Otherwise your fabric's going to be upside down. So I'm going to put a couple of pins just to mark the central position. So that's halfway down the actual bag. And then when I open this up, I know that that's the back section of my bag. This is going to be the front section of my bag. So this is the section that I want to shape. So again, if I fold that in half and put a pin right in the centre just to mark my middle position. You could do it by measuring, but I tend not to use a ruler unless I really have to. So you can see I've almost got my triangle shape marked out here. So all I need to do now is to join the lines together. And I'm going to start not right from where the fold is, I'm going to start from around about 4 inches in. So at the moment I just mark that with a pin. And then I'll go over that with a pen. So from where my pin is, down to the point where I mark my halfway line, I'm going to draw my triangle, like so. And then the same from the other side, do the larger table. So again, from 4 inches from the centre mark, I put my pin just to mark it, and then from that point down to the point of my triangle. And then just like with an envelope, I don't want it to be a perfect point, I want that to be rounded off slightly. And you can use anything to round it off, if you've got a plate, or that'll do. That's just a bobbin with some ribbon on it, and just make that curve. And then I'm going to cut through all 3 layers of fabric, so through the lining, through the outer layer and through the wadding. Like so. Take those pins out. So that's what the front of my bag's going to look like. This is the lining, and remember I've put the wadding on the back of the outer layer. So what I'm going to do now is to put those 2 pieces back together. So my lining is on the top, that's face to face with the outer layer, and I'm going to sew all the way around the flap. Now I'm only going to sew up to that central mark. I should have took my pin out really. The centre mark. I'm not going to go all the way around the bag because I'll need to turn this. So where I first folded the fabric in half at the top of the bag, that's as far as I'm going to sew. And again, just using that straight stitch, just sew all the way around the back, around the flap, sorry. Now I'm going to back tack again up to where the pin is to strengthen that. When I go into this corner, I'm going to stop, put my needle in the down position and pivot it around so I get a nice sharp corner there. And then so straight down to my curve. I'm going to take that a little bit slower because I want to make sure that my curve is accurate. And again, I'm just keeping the fabric lined up to the edge of the foot as tight as I can, or as evenly as I can, and slowly turn the fabric around. I'm not pushing or pulling the fabric through, I'm just turning it. And then back up the next side. And like I did with the previous one, when I get to the corner here, I want that to be quite nice and sharp. So I leave the needle in the down position, turn it around, and then sew up to the mark where the final pin was. There's a slight crease in my fabric so I can see where it was. And I'm going to back tack again, just to secure that. Now my wadding was a little bit bigger than the fabric in some sections. I'm going to trim that back. I'm going to trim across where those corners were. I'm going to trim the excess fabric quite close to the stitches on the curve, and this is so that when I turn it inside out I don't get a big lump of fabric there. So just chop off the extra there. So when I turn that the right way round, that's going to be the flap on my bag, like so. But now it's time to sew the pieces of the lining together. The first pieces I'm going to sew together are the right sides. So leaving the flap inside out still, I'm going to turn back, or it's like opening the page of a book, and reveal the right side of my fabric and lay that face to face with the right side of the front of the fabric, and I've just opened up the lining there. The most important part of this is to make sure that the seams match up here. That's where I'm going to start sewing, so that's where I'm going to pin. So I'll just pin those pieces right sides together all the way around, and then I'll sew straight through the wadding on both sections. So I'll just turn that over because again I want to make sure that these sections meet up, because that's the bit that you're going to see when you turn it inside out. So I shan't pin all the way around, but feel free to do that at home if you wish. Right, so a straight stitch. I need the same seam allowance as I have on the previous section. I'm going to back tack and make sure that I don't, or try and make sure that I don't overlap the stitches when I go backwards. I need them to meet up. That should do it. You can always undo a few if it doesn't match perfectly. Then I'm going to sew all the way around. So if you're happier to pin this all the way, then that's fine. What I am going to do though, although I am sewing all the way around, is to sew the two side sections first, just to make sure that they, the seams meet up on both sides. So just back tack that again, and then make sure everything's nice and square, and then sew all the way around all four sides. three sides down. When I get to the corner, I'm going to leave the needle in the down position and then pivot. So I get those nice sharp corners again, and then just sew straight across the bottom. Now I'm not pulling the fabric, I'm just holding it taut, because there's quite a few layers here when you consider that you've got 2 layers of batting and your fabrics. So I just want to make sure it goes through evenly. If you have a walking foot, I know I said walking, that's not you. If you have a walking foot, Elfie, that is be a good time to use it right here. Okay, so that's the outside of my bag. I now need to sew together the linings. And this is where it all kind of makes sense. Because again, the important bit, where all three, they look like pages now, all three meet on the same spot right here. Now I'm not going to pin this time because that's already very secure, but again I'll back tack up to that point and then sew around the 3 sides, but this time I need to leave a gap across the bottom of around about 4 inches so that I can turn it inside out. So again I'm going to go backwards, one more, my seams meet. And again, what I'm going to do is to start from that seam on both sides. Because to be honest, if the lining doesn't match it perfectly, then that's not so important, you don't see it. But you will see the point where I started. So I'm just going to back tack, go backwards a few times on that point where the hole's going to be for turning, because that's where the stress will be when I turn it, and then back up to the other side. And again, just to remind you, I want all of those sections to join all together, all in the same spot, so all 3 pages all joined together. If it doesn't quite work out perfectly, you can always go back over it by hand afterwards. So again, just a few simple back stitches, I think that's about right, and we're on the home run. Into the corner, pivot around, and remember to leave that gap across the bottom of around about 4 inches. So I'll just reverse to strengthen that slightly. Next thing I'm going to do is to trim across the corners to take away any extra bulk. So quite close to the stitches but not into the stitches, else we'll be starting again. And the same on the outer layer. Nearly done, Alfie. Yes, I know, it's good, isn't it? Shh. Right. And then we turn inside out. So with the hole that you left, you need to put your hand inside there and put all of the different sections through. Push out your corners. This is when it'll start to make sense. Like so. So that's the first 3 sides are sewed together. And again, make sure those corners are pushed out. Oops. Nicely. So that's the bottom of my bag. And then the flap on the top of my bag needs pushing out as well. Like that. And then you've got 3 sections that look a little bit like this. So what I would do normally would be to hand stitch across the inside of there. You could go over it with the machine if you like, but I think I'm just going to hand sew that, but I'll do that later because that's going to be quite time consuming. But that's the hole in the bottom of the lining, and then I'll need to push my lining inside my bag. push the corners into the corners. Now this is where I was saying it's important to make sure that those three pieces match up. Got a couple of loose threads there, because this is the bit that you're going to see. So we want that as nice and tight as you possibly can with no gaps. Now if you haven't matched it up perfectly and there's a little hole, just take some thread of the same colour and hand sew over the top. But that is your bag. Now what I would do now, sew that hole up at the bottom, and then I'd press it. And then we're going to put a magnetic clasp on just to fasten that over. Okay, and you just put the clasp on. Now there are different types of magnetic clasps. Some of them you sew on like buttons, and some of them have got little wings at the back like brads, and that's the type that I'm going to use here. Now normally with these, you'd pop them on, that's how they work, you put them, well they stick together, and you'd put them on inside the lining before you put the bag together. But I was thinking if I put that on inside just the lining, then every time you open the bag it's going to pull apart. So I'm going to put that straight through and into the top. Then I'm going to disguise it with a button. And the same on the bottom. If you were making a handbag and it had to be absolutely pristine, then you put it on the inside of the leather or whatever fabric you're making the bag out of. But again here it's going to bag, I think, if you don't do it. If you don't do it all the way through. So I'm just making sure everything's nice and flat. And then I'm going to mark. I'll put the top on first. I'm going to mark the centre point so I know it's right in the middle, which you can tell on this one because of the flap. Hello. Hello, big boy. So it doesn't really matter which side goes where, but basically I'm going to make two tiny holes, push the arms of that brad type magnet through, and then on the top side there's these little pieces that you put in here. So I'm going to take some very tiny scissors. I don't want the holes to be too big, and I'm going to just push that through and make a very small incision, and then gauge the same distance for the other side, go on in and make a small incision. The smaller the better. You can always make a small hole bigger, but you can't make a big one smaller. Now my top tip, that fits perfectly in there, is to put a little dab of glue on the inside, because before it dries, come on out, I can position, there we go, I can position the magnet over the top, but it'll also stop that fabric from fraying because it is going to get pulled, like so. So there's my two little legs that have come through, and again I'll put some more glue just on the inside here. Not too much, I don't want it to spill out. Then the top of the clasp goes on the top of there, pinch it together, and those two are quite stiff, but those two levers, those two bits of the brad, then fold over. It is quite tough, this one. In fact, I could do with some pliers to squeeze that together. I'll do that in just a second. So that's going to be my button there, that magnet. While the bag's fastened over, making sure it's all nice and centrally, I'm just going to mark where my magnet on the bottom side is going to go, and I'm going to fix that in exactly the same way. And the only final thing I'm going to do is cover this up with a button. So just need to go and find some pliers, and then I'll pop the bottom one on as well. So that's my magnet on the top, that's my magnet on the bottom. I fixed that in just the same way, so that fastens over, and it is quite strong. But the only thing I need to do now is to disguise the top just there, because that's not very pretty. Now I can't sew a button through there because there's no holes. So what I've done is actually sewn two buttons together, because I like that kind of look. And I'm going to glue it on. So I've got some extra strong fabric glue. I've sewn them together so that you see the stitch marks and it looks like it's actually been sewn on. And then I'm simply going to glue that straight on top of the clasp, so you'd never know that it was there. The only final thing we need to do is to make sure that my laptop will fit inside there. So I'll just carefully open that because it's still drying. Like Let's see how we go. It's good, isn't it? There. Oops, that's still drying, but there. An absolutely perfect. Good boy.